You wake up on a mattress that smells like what goat and crushed dreams. Not that you know what crushed dreams smell like, but you're pretty sure this is it. The blanket is made of wool that feels like it was spun from regret and stinging nettles. It's the year 1283. You're alone. Again. Because loneliness isn't just a modern problem solved by Wi-Fi and Netflix algorithms. No, medieval people were lonely too. They just didn't get to tweet about it. You blink at the ceiling, which is also stone, because of course it is. No plaster. No paint. Just gray rock and mildew that looks vaguely like the face of a disappointed saint. Your room, if you can even call it that, is a glorified storage closet inside a crumbling monastery that smells faintly of boiled cabbage and sanctified despair. You live here because your cousin convinced you that joining a monastic order would help you find purpose. Spoiler alert, your cousin is a liar. And hey, before we really get going, because we are going to get deeply, historically, spiritually lonely here, take a moment to do the very modern, very unmedieval thing of liking this video and subscribing. Only if you're actually into this kind of slow-burning, fact-soaked, sarcasm-laced bedtime storytelling. And please, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I love knowing who's lying awake at 2 a.m. in Kansas versus someone dozing off at noon in New Zealand. It's oddly comforting. Unlike this room. You sit up. Your knees crack like ancient furniture. You're wearing a linen nightshirt that hasn't been washed since St. Cuthbert's Bones last toured the countryside. Your feet at the floor, and it's not warm hardwood or plush carpet. No, it's damp stone with a smear of something suspiciously sticky. Rat blood? Holy water? Jam? You don't want to know. You just shuffle toward the tiny wooden door that creaks like it has its own theological opinions. There's no mirror. Of course not. Mirrors are rare and expensive, and you're neither rich nor vain. You wash your face using a chipped ceramic bowl full of yesterday's rainwater and possibly a drowned beetle. The towel is burlap. It exfoliates your skin down to the soul. You're not just physically isolated. You're spiritually isolated too. Because in medieval Europe, loneliness isn't just a mood, it's an affliction. And there's no therapist, no hotline, no puppy videos to cure it. If you want to connect, you pray hard. And hope that God is listening and not just screening your spiritual calls like an overworked medieval saint with bad reception. Breakfast? Oh, how modern of you. There's no smoothie, no latte, no granola. You get a piece of barley bread that tastes like dry sponge and humility. If you're lucky, you get a smear of turnip paste. If you're really lucky, you don't get dysentery. You chew your bread in silence. Because that's what monks do. Silence. A lot of it. In fact, in some orders, you're not even allowed to speak unless it's to chant or confess something deeply embarrassing. So most of your social interaction involves eye contact and the occasional aggressive nod across the cloisters. It's not just being alone. It's enforced, sacred, soul-chiseling aloneness. And here's the thing, medieval people felt loneliness. We know this from letters, from poems, from prayers scribbled in margins. There's even a Middle English word, onurly, that means alone or lonely, and it shows up in manuscripts like it's been waiting centuries to trend on Tumblr. Loneliness wasn't invented with cell phones. It just had fewer coping mechanisms and a lot more saints involved. You walk outside into the courtyard. The sky is gray. Of course it is. You haven't seen the sun in 5 days, and it's July. A raven squawks at you like it's judging your life choices. Which, to be fair, are pretty questionable. You thought spiritual retreat would be soothing. Instead, it's just you, your thoughts, and the crushing weight of eternity. Oh, and Brother Walter, who hasn't spoken in 12 years but somehow communicates with a combination of blinks and disapproving throat noises. He passes you silently, clutching a manuscript and reeking of ink, incense, and disillusionment. You try to keep busy. Because idleness is the devil's playground. And also because if you sit still too long, you start wondering if anyone would notice if you just walked into the woods and kept walking until you hit the edge of the known world. Which, in 1283, is basically the next village. So you work. You scrub floors. You grind herbs. You copy Latin texts, even though you only understand every fourth word. You grow vegetables and then eat none of them, because most of the food goes to the abbey's guests, who are richer, louder, and smell faintly of entitlement. You listen to the wind. You listen to your thoughts. You listen to your stomach threatening a revolution. The problem with loneliness in the Middle Ages is that it's not always visible. Sometimes you're in a crowd, a feast, a market, a sermon, and still feel like a sack of unremarkable flesh in a sea of human obligation. Marriage doesn't fix it. Neither does religion. Sometimes you're just a peasant with 12 kids and a spouse who only speaks to you to ask for more gruel. And somehow, still, you feel utterly alone. But at least you're not in a cave. Because yes, if you were truly devoted to spiritual isolation, you could become an anchorite. That means getting bricked into a tiny stone cell attached to a church, with a single window for food and one for God. For the rest of your natural life. No door. No going back. Just you, your prayers, and the echo of your own eternal introspection. Honestly, it makes your current situation look like a 5-star spa retreat. Some anchorites reported visions. Others just hallucinated from lack of sunlight. Either way, their solitude was considered holy, even enviable. People would come to the little church window and ask for advice, hoping that a person who hadn't seen another human in 15 years might offer wisdom. What they usually got was something like, "Don't sin. Also, bring more beans next time." Back to your own lonely life. Midday comes and goes. You eat again, more bread, more turnips, less hope. You watch the clouds roll by and wonder if anyone else feels this hollow ache in the ribs. Spoiler, they do. Across the kingdom, there are lonely housewives, wandering pilgrims, widowed nobles, apprentice blacksmiths, who haven't spoken to their crush in 5 months because courtship is a terrifying labyrinth of veils, fathers, and poorly timed dowries. You, at least, have your books. Books are rare, valuable, sometimes chained to the walls, but they're company. You read about saints who were martyred in creative ways, and somehow it makes you feel slightly better about being ignored at Vespers. At least no one is setting you on fire. Sometimes you wonder what life would be like with a friend. Not just a colleague or a fellow monk, but an actual friend. Someone who listens when you speak. Someone who knows that you prefer dried apples over boiled leeks. Someone who doesn't mind that you hum off-key during evening prayers. But friendship isn't guaranteed. It's rare, precious, often suspect. Too much attachment could be seen as weakness, or worse, distraction from God. So you keep your longings folded inside like a letter you'll never send. Evening falls. The bells toll. You go to chapel. You chant the same hymns you've chanted every day for the past 2 years. Your voice blends with others, but you still feel like a soloist drowning in a chorus. You look at the faces around you. Some are serene. Others are blank. A few are clearly thinking about soup. Loneliness isn't always sad. Sometimes it's just ambient. A background hum in the soul. Like the draft that slips under the door. Like the ache in your knees after too many hours kneeling on cold stone. It's there, but you get used to it. You make peace with it. You hold it like a pet ferret that occasionally bites your fingers. The night comes slowly, like a drunk bishop. You lie in your bed again. Same mattress. Same scratchy wool. Same silence. You listen to the wind rattle the shutters. You wonder if anyone, anywhere, is thinking about you. Probably not. But maybe. And maybe that's enough. You drift off, not because you're at peace, but because you're exhausted. Loneliness in the Middle Ages isn't something you solve. It's something you carry. Like a splinter. Like a prayer. Like a particularly stubborn piece of barley in your molars. But don't worry. Tomorrow will be exactly the same. And that, somehow, is a comfort. You wake up in a bed that, technically speaking, exists. Calling it comfortable would be legally questionable. It's stuffed with straw, some of which may still contain traces of last autumn's mouse infestation, and it makes a faint wheezing sound every time you shift. You've developed the highly specialized skill of sleeping without moving, just so you don't wake up with hay embedded in your ear canal. Outside, a rooster screams into the dawn like it's personally offended by your existence. You didn't set an alarm, because it's the 14th century and nobody owns a clock, but you don't need one. The village wakes when the sun says so. Which is, unfortunately, right now. Your name doesn't matter. You're a villager. You live in a thatched cottage made from mud, sticks, and blind optimism. The roof leaks. The walls wobble when it's windy. The floor is either dirt or organic medieval carpet, which is a fancy way of saying moss and droppings. Your home smells like wood smoke, unwashed feet, and whatever died in the chimney last November. You're not religious because you're devout. You're religious because the church is the only thing more powerful than a winter famine, and because the one thing worse than loneliness is being lonely and eternally damned. So yes, you pray. You also give the priest chickens on feast days because you heard indulgences might be 2 for 1 if he's in a good mood. Now, here's the thing. When people imagine medieval loneliness, they picture some sad knight staring into the fog. That's cute. But most people weren't knights. Most people were you, a peasant, born in a village you'll never leave, surrounded by people you've known since birth, and somehow still aching for real connection. Why? Because seeing people every day doesn't mean they see you. This is a village of about 300 souls. Everyone knows everything about everyone, including things you don't even know about yourself. Remember that time you accidentally tripped over a piglet? Agnes still brings it up at every harvest. You'll never live it down. So while you're never truly alone, you're also never free. Every word, every look, every wrong kind of bread you bake, it's remembered, catalogued, whispered about while you pretend not to listen. You head outside. It's muddy. It's always muddy. The weather here exists on a sliding scale between wet and biblical punishment. You've got chores to do. Because in a medieval village, your options are work or die cold and friendless. You gather water from the well, which creaks ominously and smells faintly like something once drowned in it. You avoid looking at Bertha the cow, who has been giving you judgmental stares ever since you dropped that bucket last week. Yes, cows can be petty. You say good morning to old Thomas. He doesn't respond, because he's been deaf since the Battle of Absolutely Nowhere, a local conflict involving 2 drunk cousins and a missing wheelbarrow. Still, he nods at you like he's sharing the burden of existence, and you nod back like, yes, Thomas. I too have seen things. You chop wood for the oven, even though it's midsummer and your hands are blistered. You harvest turnips. Always the turnips. You used to dream of exciting vegetables like carrots or beans. But you were young and foolish then. The turnip is your destiny. So, let's talk about relationships. Not romantic ones, those come with their own particular set of medieval headaches, but the simple act of bonding. Of friendship. Companionship. You know, someone who doesn't just grunt at you while you shovel pig droppings. You might be lucky enough to have a sibling who isn't terrible, or a neighbor who shares boiled acorn stew without judgment. But most of your interactions are transactional. You borrow a tool, they borrow a goat. You help fix a fence, they help you not die during childbirth. Friendships are stitched together through mutual survival, not personality quizzes. You've got acquaintances. You've got rivals. But true connection, someone who just gets you, who listens because they care, not because you're standing next to the grain bin and it's too awkward to walk away, that's rare. And when you do find it, it's fragile. One wrong word, one rumor, one unfortunate lice outbreak, and you're outcast faster than you can say, but I swear that wasn't my pig. And let's not forget the weather. Oh, the weather. If seasonal depression were a character in this story, it'd be the uncredited lead. The sky is gray for 8 months straight. The sun makes a brief cameo around midsummer, usually when you're inside, vomiting from undercooked gruel. And when winter comes, you huddle by the hearth, hoping the rats don't eat your boots again. You have boots. Technically, they're made of leather, straw, and chronic disappointment. During winter, the loneliness sharpens. The village grows quiet. No festivals. No markets. No awkward midsummer dances where you try to flirt by offering someone a slightly less moldy apple. Just snow. Cold. Silence. You stare at the fire until your eyes hurt, wondering if this is what eternal solitude feels like. It's not dramatic. Just numb. Your best companion might be a dog. Not a cute Instagram dog. A medieval dog. It probably has one eye and answers to a name like Scraps or Don't Bite That. Still, it curls up next to you at night and keeps you slightly less cold, slightly less alone. And in this world, slightly is everything. Sometimes, in the stillness of night, you think about leaving. Just walking. Maybe joining a monastery. Maybe running off to the city. Maybe becoming a peddler who tells jokes for bread. But you never do. Because that kind of freedom costs more than you have. And besides, loneliness doesn't care where you are. It follows you, like a bad smell or a tax collector. And there's the church again. Oh, the church. You sit through Mass not just for salvation, but for company. People sit together, stand together, chant in a language no one really understands anymore. But for a moment, you feel part of something. A small something. A quiet something. But something nonetheless. Evening comes. You return home. You light a candle. The house flickers with shadows that look like memories. You eat bread and cheese. The bread is stale. The cheese is slightly blue. You pretend it's fancy. You talk to yourself, quietly. Not because you're losing your mind, though, let's be honest, that's a possibility, but because your voice is the only one that listens without judgment. Loneliness in a medieval village isn't about being physically isolated. It's about being unseen. About going through motions in a world where everyone knows your name, but not your soul. About yearning for something you can't name, because nobody ever taught you the word connection. Just duty, honor, and stop crying or the devil will get you. You lie down. Same straw mattress. Same damp smell. The moonlight drips through the cracks in the thatch, painting your wall in silver sorrow. You close your eyes. You dream of cities, of music, of someone looking at you and not through you. You dream of being known. And tomorrow, you'll wake up. You'll do it all again. Not because it gets better, but because it goes on. You wake up in a bed that, technically speaking, exists. Calling it comfortable would be legally questionable. It's stuffed with straw, some of which may still contain traces of last autumn's mouse infestation, and it makes a faint wheezing sound every time you shift. You've developed the highly specialized skill of sleeping without moving, just so you don't wake up with hay embedded in your ear canal. Outside, a rooster screams into the dawn like it's personally offended by your existence. You didn't set an alarm, because it's the 14th century and nobody owns a clock, but you don't need one. The village wakes when the sun says so. Which is, unfortunately, right now. Your name doesn't matter. You're a villager. You live in a thatched cottage made from mud, sticks, and blind optimism. The roof leaks. The walls wobble when it's windy. The floor is either dirt or organic medieval carpet, which is a fancy way of saying moss and droppings. Your home smells like wood smoke, unwashed feet, and whatever died in the chimney last November. You're not religious because you're devout. You're religious because the church is the only thing more powerful than a winter famine. And because the one thing worse than loneliness is being lonely and eternally damned. So yes, you pray. You also give the priest chickens on feast days because you heard indulgences might be 2 for 1 if he's in a good mood. Now, here's the thing. When people imagine medieval loneliness, they picture some sad knight staring into the fog. That's cute. But most people weren't knights. Most people were you, a peasant, born in a village you'll never leave, surrounded by people you've known since birth, and somehow still aching for real connection. Why? Because seeing people every day doesn't mean they see you. This is a village of about 300 souls. Everyone knows everything about everyone, including things you don't even know about yourself. Remember that time you accidentally tripped over a piglet? Agnes still brings it up at every harvest. You'll never live it down. So while you're never truly alone, you're also never free. Every word, every look, every wrong kind of bread you bake, it's remembered, catalogued, whispered about while you pretend not to listen. You head outside. It's muddy. It's always muddy. The weather here exists on a sliding scale between wet and biblical punishment. You've got chores to do. Because in a medieval village, your options are work or die cold and friendless. You gather water from the well, which creaks ominously and smells faintly like something once drowned in it. You avoid looking at Bertha the cow, who has been giving you judgmental stares ever since you dropped that bucket last week. Yes, cows can be petty. You say good morning to old Thomas. He doesn't respond, because he's been deaf since the Battle of Absolutely Nowhere, a local conflict involving 2 drunk cousins and a missing wheelbarrow. Still, he nods at you like he's sharing the burden of existence, and you nod back like, yes, Thomas. I too have seen things. You chop wood for the oven, even though it's midsummer and your hands are blistered. You harvest turnips. Always the turnips. You used to dream of exciting vegetables like carrots or beans. But you were young and foolish then. The turnip is your destiny. So, let's talk about relationships. Not romantic ones, those come with their own particular set of medieval headaches, but the simple act of bonding, of friendship, companionship. You know, someone who doesn't just grunt at you while you shovel pig droppings. You might be lucky enough to have a sibling who isn't terrible, or a neighbor who shares boiled acorn stew, without judgment. But most of your interactions are transactional. You borrow a tool, they borrow a goat. You help fix a fence, they help you not die during childbirth. Friendships are stitched together through mutual survival, not personality quizzes. You've got acquaintances. You've got rivals. But true connection, someone who just gets you, who listens because they care, not because you're standing next to the grain bin and it's too awkward to walk away, that's rare. And when you do find it, it's fragile. One wrong word, one rumor, one unfortunate lice outbreak, and you're outcast faster than you can say, "But I swear that wasn't my pig." And let's not forget the weather. Oh, the weather. If seasonal depression were a character in this story, it'd be the uncredited lead. The sky is gray for 8 months straight. The sun makes a brief cameo around midsummer, usually when you're inside, vomiting from undercooked gruel. And when winter comes, you huddle by the hearth, hoping the rats don't eat your boots again. You have boots. Technically, they're made of leather, straw, and chronic disappointment. During winter, the loneliness sharpens. The village grows quiet. No festivals. No markets. No awkward midsummer dances where you try to flirt by offering someone a slightly less moldy apple. Just snow. Cold. Silence. You stare at the fire until your eyes hurt, wondering if this is what eternal solitude feels like. It's not dramatic. Just numb. Your best companion might be a dog. Not a cute Instagram dog. A medieval dog. It probably has one eye and answers to a name like Scraps or Don't Bite That. Still, it curls up next to you at night and keeps you slightly less cold, slightly less alone. And in this world, slightly is everything. Sometimes, in the stillness of night, you think about leaving. Just walking. Maybe joining a monastery. Maybe running off to the city. Maybe becoming a peddler who tells jokes for bread. But you never do. Because that kind of freedom costs more than you have. And besides, loneliness doesn't care where you are. It follows you, like a bad smell or a tax collector. And there's the church again. Oh, the church. You sit through Mass not just for salvation, but for company. People sit together, stand together, chant in a language no one really understands anymore. But for a moment, you feel part of something. A small something. A quiet something. But something nonetheless. Evening comes. You return home. You light a candle. The house flickers with shadows that look like memories. You eat bread and cheese. The bread is stale. The cheese is slightly blue. You pretend it's fancy. You talk to yourself, quietly. Not because you're losing your mind, though, let's be honest, that's a possibility, but because your voice is the only one that listens without judgment. Loneliness in a medieval village isn't about being physically isolated. It's about being unseen. About going through motions in a world where everyone knows your name, but not your soul. About yearning for something you can't name, because nobody ever taught you the word connection. Just duty, honor, and stop crying or the devil will get you. You lie down. Same straw mattress. Same damp smell. The moonlight drips through the cracks in the thatch, painting your wall in silver sorrow. You close your eyes. You dream of cities, of music, of someone looking at you and not through you. You dream of being known. And tomorrow, you'll wake up. You'll do it all again. Not because it gets better, but because it goes on. You've had enough. The turnips. The weather. The vague emotional distance of everyone who knows your entire life story, but couldn't care less about your favorite color. You want more. You want peace. Maybe even meaning. So naturally, you do what any emotionally exhausted medieval peasant would do. You renounce all worldly possessions, which in your case includes a wooden spoon, a suspiciously damp sheepskin, and that weird rock you found that kind of looks like St. Cuthbert, and you walk away. Just away. And after several days of wandering through mud, fog, and existential dread, you arrive at the gates of a monastery. It's stone, quiet, and smells vaguely of old candles and older feet. You knock. A small wooden panel opens. A face stares out. You don't say anything. You just look at them with the desperate, haunted eyes of someone who once tried to make friends with a pig. They nod. You're in. Welcome to monastic life, where silence is holy, self-denial is trendy, and the nearest party is at least 300 years away. Before we go further, you know what's coming, right? So, take a moment. Get comfortable. And if you enjoyed this strange little medieval journey we're taking together, gently click that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's oddly satisfying to know who else is losing sleep with me. Maybe together, we can outnumber the turnips. Right. Let's talk about your new life. You are now a novice, which is medieval 4 in turn with absolutely no rights. You're not a monk yet. First, you have to prove you can survive endless chores, cold floors, and the particular horror of getting up at 3:45 a.m. every single morning for matins, the pre-dawn prayer session that absolutely no one enjoys and everyone pretends to find spiritually enriching. You wake up in a communal dormitory. There are 30 other novices, all breathing heavily in synchronized misery. The room smells like beeswax, wool, and that one brother who always forgets to wash under his robes. The floor is stone. There's no heating. Your blanket is made of some kind of punitive haircloth that feels like hugging a cactus in a thunderstorm. You rise in the dark. Always the dark. You shuffle silently to the chapel. You sit, you stand, you chant in Latin you barely understand. Occasionally, someone sneezes and it echoes like the voice of a ghost who resents being here. Monastic life is structured. Painfully so. Every hour is accounted for. You've traded the chaos of village life for the suffocating routine of the cloister. Breakfast is at dawn. Work is in silence. Prayer punctuates every task like divine punctuation. It's comforting, in a way. Predictable. Safe. But also deeply lonely. You thought the monastery would be full of wise, warm men who would take you under their wing and teach you secrets of the universe over mugs of warm cider. Instead, you get Brother Hugh. Brother Hugh once fasted for 3 days straight and then passed out into the lentil stew. Now he just glares at everyone and judges your posture. You also get Brother Alan, who's very into flagellation. Like, weirdly into it. He walks around with a look of smug satisfaction, possibly from believing he's one lash closer to enlightenment. You try not to make eye contact. You also try not to comment on the fact that his favorite whip has a name. It's Mercy. There's nothing mystical about it. Then there's the abbot. He's serene, unreadable, and terrifying in the way that only someone who's spent 30 years saying absolutely nothing can be. He never smiles. He occasionally breathes through his nose in a way that suggests divine disappointment. You try to fit in. You copy manuscripts. Slowly. Painfully. With ink that smells like fermented squid and a quill that makes your wrist ache. You're copying the Psalms. Over and over. You think Psalm 88 is personally attacking you. You're starting to develop a deep resentment for David, and you suspect he wouldn't return your letters even if he was still alive. You scrub floors. You sweep courtyards. You grow vegetables in strict rows and you're not allowed to complain when the lettuce freezes into green misery overnight. You chant. You walk. You kneel until your knees feel like jelly filled with regret. And you are alone. So deeply alone. Not because no one's around, but because no one speaks. You thought the silence would be peaceful. Instead, it's oppressive. A vacuum of sound that swallows your thoughts and replaces them with a slow, echoing drip of a leaking roof tile. You find yourself whispering your own name sometimes, just to remember you have one. You crave conversation the way a monk craves water in the desert. Sometimes, one of the older monks will pat your shoulder or offer a nod. And that's something. But most of the time, the silence wraps around you like a wet blanket of existential detachment. Even your prayers feel lonely. You kneel, you whisper, you repeat Latin phrases that you hope are vaguely flattering to God. You listen for divine response. You hear the wind, or a mouse, or Brother Alan snoring again during lauds. But not God. Not really. You start to wonder if the saints were lonely too. If their miracles were just desperate cries for attention in a world that forgot how to listen. You wonder if the angels ever get bored. If heaven has awkward small talk. If Gabriel ever gets tired of telling people to fear not and just wants a hug. You try writing. You compose small poems in the margins of your manuscripts, just for yourself, about birds, about dreams, about what it would feel like to be known. Then one day, you get in trouble. Brother Gerald finds your poems. He reads one out loud to the abbot. It's about stars and longing, and, apparently, that's borderline heretical and definitely distracting from the transcription of sacred texts. You're told to fast for 2 days and copy Leviticus as punishment. It's 27 chapters of laws, rules, blood rituals, and mold removal procedures. You emerge a changed person, and yet, you stay. Because as empty as the silence is, it's also yours. No one gossips here. No one brings up that time you cried while pulling weeds. No one expects anything but obedience and routine. And you can live with that, even if it's lonely. You find small ways to anchor yourself. You learn the bird songs outside your cell window. You start feeding a mouse that lives behind the herb cabinet. You name him St. Wilfred. You talk to him sometimes. He listens. Or he's trying to assess if you're edible. Either way, connection. And then, one day, something shifts. Brother Matthew, who hasn't spoken directly to you in 6 months, leaves a small piece of honeycomb on your bench during work duty. No explanation. No eye contact. Just a quiet gesture of kindness. It's the best thing you've tasted in years. You look up. He doesn't smile. But he nods. And you nod back. That's it. That's the whole exchange. And it's enough to keep going. Because even here, in the quiet heart of holy isolation, someone noticed. You go to bed that night with your stomach a little less empty, your soul a little less hollow, and St. Wilfred curled up in your robe pocket like the fairy harbinger of sanity he's become. Loneliness still sleeps beside you. But for the first time, it doesn't have the whole bed. You wake up next to your new spouse. The mattress is lumpy, the sheets are scratchy, and the smell of garlic hangs in the air like a medieval ghost. You're not entirely sure if it's coming from them or you. Neither of you has bathed in days, partly due to water scarcity, partly because bathing too often is still seen as suspiciously French. You're married now, and you're still lonely. Let's rewind a bit. Marriage in the medieval world isn't what you think. You didn't swipe right. There was no heartfelt proposal under a blossoming tree. No candlelight dinner. Just your parents, their livestock negotiations, and a quiet but firm agreement made over a jug of ale that smelled like it had been cursed by Saint Dysentery himself. Maybe you're a peasant and your wedding was a muttered vow in front of a priest and half a chicken. Maybe you're slightly better off and someone offered a dowry of 3 sheep and a slightly dented cooking pot to sweeten the deal. Either way, you didn't marry for love. You married because you're poor, lonely, aging faster than soft cheese, and statistically likely to die of exposure if you don't find someone to share firewood with. So now you're sharing your life, your bed, your chores, your plagues, with another human being. In theory, this should cure your loneliness. It doesn't. In fact, it sometimes makes it worse. But before we get too far into the bleakness, take a second to do the thing that keeps this channel from sinking into the digital mud of obscurity. Like the video. Subscribe if you're enjoying this painfully accurate journey through the 1300s, and tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's comforting to know we're not alone, even when we're talking about the deep marital despair of people who thought emotional intimacy was just a demon with a new name. Back to your situation. You're married now. You live together in a one-room cottage, probably with several children, a goat, a few chickens, and a damp ceiling that drips every time the heavens get bored and decide to cry on you. Your spouse is fine. They're not mean. Not particularly affectionate either. They cook when there's food, they grunt when you talk, and occasionally you hold hands at festivals like two people reenacting a dream they only vaguely remember. But you are still, unmistakably, deeply alone. Why? Because no one taught you how to connect. Not emotionally, not verbally, and definitely not romantically. The closest thing you've seen to intimacy was when Thomas kissed his wife on the forehead before dying of dysentery. It was sweet. Also very damp. There are no books on relationships. No therapy. No TikTok therapist saying it's okay to have needs. You have needs. You also have 8 turnips, 2 wooden spoons, and an overwhelming sense that life is just something that happens to you until it stops. Marriage isn't a haven, it's a contract. You both work. You both suffer. You maybe raise some kids who will either help with chores or die tragically in a poetic and mud-related incident. You don't talk about your feelings. You don't even have the words. The closest you come is a sigh. A shared silence over a burnt stew. The knowledge that you both woke up cold and sore and scared, and you'll probably go to bed the same way. Sometimes your spouse is kind. They bring you a berry they found in the woods. They patch your shirt. They sit beside you during a storm and whisper a prayer that sounds like it was passed down from someone who also didn't know how to love, but tried anyway. Other times they're distant, or angry, or silent for days because their cow died and no one, including them, knows how to grieve in a world where emotions are treated like unnecessary luxuries. And sometimes they just disappear. Off to war, off to market, off into the woods one day and never return. Wolves? Bandits? Divine rapture? You don't know. You just wait, and eventually, the world forgets them. And you start again. There's something uniquely hollow about sharing a bed with someone and still feeling like a ghost. You can reach out and touch them, but it's like trying to hold fog. There's no depth, no tether, just routine and shared chores. You envy the monks now. They were alone, but at least they knew it. You're in this weird half-state where you're never quite alone, but never truly seen, either. You try to fix it. You learn to make little jokes. You learn their rhythms, when they like to talk, when they need quiet. You leave them gifts, a clean rag, a sprig of thyme, the slightly less moldy part of the bread. Sometimes it helps. You have moments, tiny ones. You laugh together when the goat gets stuck on the roof again. You hum the same tune while stirring porridge. You cry when your first child says something almost coherent and doesn't immediately fall face first into the fire. There's a kind of companionship in shared survival. You still don't talk about the loneliness, but you both feel it. And sometimes that's enough. And sometimes it's not. There are whole marriages that exist like this. A partnership in name, a collaboration in labor, but emotionally, a vast tundra of quiet ache. And the worst part? No one sees it. Not your neighbors, not your priest, not even your children. They see two people working together, feeding animals, going to mass, and assume all is well. But inside, you're screaming into a hay-filled void. You fantasize about what love might be, if it exists. You've heard minstrels sing about it. You've heard poems read by traveling bards about knights and ladies and longing that sets fire to the soul. And for a moment, you want that. You want passion, connection, fire. And then you remember you have 7 chickens to feed, your eldest has boils, and your spouse is trying to fix the roof with bread dough because the thatch ran out. No time for love when the chimney's smoking backwards and the pigs have eaten your shoe again. Still, you hold on to something. A hope, maybe. That one day there will be a look, a word, a hand on your shoulder that says, I see you. Not as a spouse, not as a worker, but as a person. You think maybe that's the real cure for loneliness, not company, not marriage, not even shared suffering. Just being seen, truly seen. Until then, you survive. You do your chores. You sleep beside someone who may or may not be your soulmate. You laugh when you can, cry when you're sure no one's watching, and dream of something more. You're not alone. Not really. But you're also not alone. It's complicated. Like everything else in the Middle Ages. You're back in church. Again. And not because you're particularly devout. Or because you had a mystical dream involving floating saints and thunderous Latin. No. You're here because it's Sunday, the town bell rang, and if you don't show up, people will start whispering that you're in league with goats. Not the friendly goats. The demonic ones. You shuffle into the cold stone building. It's damp. Everything's damp. The floor. The pews. Probably your soul. You sit beside someone who's either praying or asleep. It's hard to tell, and it would be rude to ask. The priest begins Mass in Latin, a language you don't speak, understand, or particularly care for. But it sounds official, and that's enough. You stand when everyone else stands. You kneel when they kneel. You mouth words that you're 60% sure are prayers and 40% sure are just random syllables you've memorized from years of peer pressure. Because here's the thing, you've tried marriage, hard labor, community festivals, and even that time you talked to a rock for 2 weeks just to feel something. None of it helped. So now, you're back to the big guy upstairs. Not out of spiritual enlightenment, but out of desperation. Maybe, just maybe, the Creator of all things has a solution to your existential medieval sadness. Spoiler, he doesn't. But before we plunge too deep into this ecclesiastical emotional void, this is your friendly and slightly sarcastic reminder to like the video, subscribe if you're still here suffering with me through the past, and let me know where you're listening from. Time and location. It's always fun seeing people from 2:13 a.m. in Sweden bonding with 9:46 p.m. insomniacs in Ohio. Global loneliness. What a concept. Now, back to church. Religion in the Middle Ages is everything. It's your calendar, your law, your therapy, your weather report, your social media minus the selfies. If something goes wrong, it's God's will. If something goes right, it's also God's will, but probably a test. So don't get too comfortable. And if you're lonely, guess what? God sees you. All the time. Everywhere. No pressure. You start attending more services. Not because you suddenly love Gregorian chanting, but because there's something comforting about the repetition, the incense, the ritual. It's like spiritual wallpaper. You can zone out in it and no one minds. You confess more often. Not just sins, feelings, loneliness, doubts. The priest nods solemnly, blesses you, and gives you penance like say 10 Hail Marys and stop crying in the fields at dusk. Thanks, Father. You try pilgrimages, walking to far-off holy places in the hopes that the journey will somehow cleanse your inner ache. You meet other travelers. Some are deeply pious. Others are obviously just trying to escape their families or debts. One man walks the entire way on his knees. Another carries a chicken for spiritual support. You get blisters. You get rained on. You lose your chicken friend. But somewhere between mile 30 and mile 70, you feel something stir. A moment of peace. Maybe it's God. Maybe it's exhaustion. Maybe it's just the relief of not having to make eye contact with your spouse for a week. You arrive at the shrine. You pray. You leave an offering, a dried apple and your last decent sock. You don't feel transformed. But you do feel less heavy. Like some of the fog inside you got replaced with silence that feels more like a bomb than a void. You head home. And things don't change. Not really. Your house is still cold. Your spouse still has the emotional range of a wet log. Your children are loud and sticky. Your work is endless. But you are slightly different. Because now, when you feel the loneliness creeping in like a draft through the cracked window, you close your eyes and whisper a prayer. Not because you think someone's listening, but because you are. You become the kind of person who lights candles in empty churches just to feel less alone. You volunteer to help clean the chapel, not out of devotion, but because it gives you 30 minutes of quiet sweeping and the vague illusion of purpose. You talk to the statues. A lot. You tell St. Peter about your anxieties. You confide in St. Catherine about how no one listens to you at dinner. You ask Mary to explain how she kept her composure through everything, because you almost snapped just trying to make oatcakes without crying yesterday. And you get no answers. Not directly, but you get a stillness. A moment of stillness in a world of chaos. That's more than most people get. You start noticing other lonely people in the pews. The old widow who always sits by the altar. The young man with the haunted eyes who never speaks. You start nodding at them. Occasionally, you even whisper a greeting. It's enough. Connection doesn't have to be loud. You even start singing during services. Quietly. Off-key. But with heart. And maybe that's what religion gives you. In the end, not a cure for loneliness, but a rhythm to endure it. A scaffold to hang your emptiness on, so it doesn't crush you completely. The saints were lonely. The apostles were misunderstood. Even Christ, at the end, felt abandoned. You are in excellent company. And so you keep going. You still feel lonely. But now it's a holy loneliness. Sanctified by ritual. Anointed by repetition. Comforted, occasionally, by the sound of your own voice echoing through the stone hall as you ask a stained-glass angel if they, too, ever cried into their porridge. They don't answer. But somehow, that's okay. You're tired of being alone. And tired of pretending you're not. You've tried religion. You've tried marriage. You've even tried aggressively befriending a goose, and that ended with you limping into town and telling the priest you fell on a rake. The goose is fine, by the way. Emotionally distant, but fine. So today, you're doing something different. You're taking your loneliness into your own dirt-caked hands. You're joining a guild. Yes, a guild. Not the modern kind, like an MMORPG guild where strangers yell at each other over headsets about elf sorcery. No, this is the Middle Ages. You're joining a real-life medieval trade guild, part workers' union, part drinking club, part secret society, part unofficial therapy group for emotionally stunted blacksmiths. You don't have to be a master craftsman yet. You just need a trade, some humility, and an astonishing tolerance for bureaucracy, ale, and candlelit arguments about tallow pricing. Guilds are everywhere: bakers, weavers, coopers, masons, brewers, candlemakers, even musicians. There's probably a guild for people who build outhouses and another for people who empty them. No task is too mundane to have a code of conduct, an initiation rite, and a very strict rule about who gets to wear what color of hat. You step into the local guild hall. It smells like smoke, beer, ambition, and someone's sweaty doublet. There's a long table with mismatched chairs, a giant ledger, a wax seal that's been used more often than the town doctor, and sitting around the room, men and women who are supposed to become your friends, colleagues, and new social circle. They don't look friendly, but neither do you. So that's fair. Before we dig deeper into this overwhelming smell of medieval ambition and barley breath, now's a good moment to gently reach for that like button if you're still with me. Subscribe if this long, slow plunge into historical melancholy is your cup of watered-down ale. And let me know in the comments where and when you're listening from. Is it 3:19 a.m.? 11:47 p.m.? Are you lying in bed, pretending this is a bedtime story about failure and unmet expectations? Perfect. That's exactly what it is. Back to the guild. Joining a guild is supposed to give you a sense of community, structure, belonging. And in theory, it does. It gives you other people who do what you do, suffer how you suffer, and complain in unison about the mayor's tax hikes. But it's also intense. First, there are rules. So many rules. You can't just bake bread. You have to bake it their way. Standard weight. Approved ovens. No sneaky additions of herbs or mystical honey unless you want to be fined and publicly shamed with a ceremonial loaf of disgrace. You can't sell on certain days. You can't hire outside the guild. You can't undercut your fellow guild members unless you want to be yeeted from the brotherhood and find yourself mysteriously unable to purchase flour or nails or basic dignity. There are meetings. Long ones, with minutes and voting and yelling. They argue over whether the town's new water mill is a blessing or a threat. They accuse one another of using subpar sheep wool. One guy insists he invented the idea of rounded barrels and wants everyone to call them Bartholomew's blessings. You sit through it all, chewing a piece of stale rye and wondering if this is what friendship looks like in the 14th century. It turns out, kind of, yes. Because under all the bickering and procedure, something magical happens. You start to learn names, faces, habits. Greta the spinner always hums when she works. Tomas the brewer always carries extra barley in his sleeves for luck. Jorin, the apprentice candlemaker, is wildly superstitious and refuses to touch beeswax during a full moon. You all work hard, but now you do it together. You share tools, tips, curses. You lend each other shoulders and soap and opinions no one asked for but everyone secretly needs. When your cart breaks, someone helps fix it. When your cat dies, a tragic but inevitable event, someone leaves a sprig of rosemary and a lumpy candle outside your door. You don't cry, but you feel something close. There's something powerful about struggling beside people who understand your exact brand of exhaustion. They might not know your innermost thoughts, but they get why your hands are cracked and your voice is hoarse, and why you spent 3 hours yesterday arguing with a barrel. You're not best friends, but you are comrades, and that matters. You also get perks, feast days, actual feasts. You eat bread that isn't burnt, meat that isn't suspicious. There's dancing, music, gossip so spicy it could flavor an entire winter's worth of stew. People get drunk, dramatic, and occasionally accidentally married. It's beautiful. And funerals, oh, the funerals. Guild members take care of their own. When someone dies, there's ceremony, procession, a eulogy read by someone who probably didn't know the deceased that well, but says things like, He was a man of strong hammering and mild conversation. You show up. You mourn. You carry the casket if needed. And you know that when it's your turn, they'll do the same for you. There's comfort in that. You also learn how to teach. One day, an apprentice is assigned to you. A terrified 12-year-old with bad hair and no idea how to do anything other than panic and knock things over. You teach them. You yell, of course. It's part of the process. But you also encourage. You show them how to make soap that doesn't explode. You explain why wax melts the way it does. You accidentally become the most stable adult in their life, which is both tragic and kind of touching. And just like that, you're no longer just a lonely worker trying to pass time until death. You're a mentor, a cog in a very human, very flawed, but deeply connected machine. But it's not all heartwarming montages. Guilds can be brutal. If you offend the wrong person, you're blacklisted. If you try to innovate, you're accused of heresy against the sacred art of doing things the way we've always done them. There are politics, backroom deals, secret pacts involving candle quotas and beer prices. Sometimes you miss the simplicity of solitude. But then, you remember what it felt like to sit alone in your cottage, listening to the wind whisper through the cracks, wondering if anyone would notice if you just stopped. Now, someone would. That doesn't cure the loneliness entirely. There are still nights when you feel like a ghost haunting your own body. Days when no one says your name, and you feel like background scenery in a story you're not part of. But you're seen more often now. A nod from across the market. A shared side during inventory. A half-baked joke about bees that someone actually laughs at. Guild life is messy, structured, occasionally corrupt, but undeniably human. And in a world that often treats you like a replaceable lump of flesh, that's something worth showing up for. You still get lonely. But now, you get lonely together. And honestly, that's a massive improvement. It's cold. Not the kind of cold you can fix with an extra blanket or a bowl of stew. No, this is existential cold. The kind that lives in your bones and whispers things like, no one truly understands you, and your best conversation this week was with a cheese wheel. So naturally, you do what every lonely medieval peasant eventually does. You start telling stories. Not professionally, of course. That would be absurd. You're not a bard. You don't own a lute. You have absolutely no idea what a meter is. You can't even read, technically, but that's never stopped anyone in this century from pretending they've got wisdom to share. It starts small. One evening, someone asks how your day was. And instead of saying, fine, you accidentally launch into a 20-minute saga about your neighbor's goat and the tragic theft of your only spoon. You add a few dramatic pauses, embellish the weather, throw in a moral about hubris. Someone laughs. Someone else nods solemnly. And just like that, you're a storyteller. Congratulations. You're now the unofficial village therapist, historian, and after-dinner entertainment. And you didn't even have to put on pants with embroidery. Before we cozy up any deeper into this tale about tales, if you've somehow found yourself enjoying this very long descent into medieval coping mechanisms, now's a lovely moment to press that like button, subscribe if your eyes are still open, and drop a comment with your time zone and insomnia level. I love reading those. 2:13 a.m. in New Zealand, 4:47 a.m. in a Toronto apartment surrounded by cat hair and regret. You're exactly my kind of people. Now, back to the fire. Because that's where this all happens. Around fire. Or candlelight. Or sometimes the flickering glow of your last burning hope. But mostly fire. Storytelling is the medieval answer to therapy, TikTok, and television, all rolled into one humble peasant with decent timing and a flair for exaggerated facial expressions. You start noticing how hungry people are for stories. Not just entertainment. Connection. People lean in. They laugh louder than the joke deserves. They ask questions. They remember details weeks later. Why? Because stories make people feel less alone. And loneliness, as we've firmly established by now, is the default setting for most of the population. Telling stories is how you say, hey, I see you, without making uncomfortable eye contact or writing poetry, which is illegal in 3 counties unless you're wearing a feathered hat. You tell tales of misadventure, of ghosts that turn out to be cows, of saints who miraculously bake bread during plagues, of your childhood near-death experience with a rogue ladder and a goose. Always a goose. Sometimes, the stories are completely made up. Sometimes they're too true. You start getting requests. Tell the one about the possessed pig again. What happened to that knight who fell in love with a tree? Can you make up something tonight? Something happy. And so you do. You realize, with a mixture of joy and horror, that people trust you with their emotions. That your ridiculous, slightly chaotic bedtime yarns are doing something sacred. They're giving people permission to feel. In a world that doesn't ask, "How are you?" Just, "Did you finish your chores?" This is revolutionary. Sometimes, after a particularly emotional story, someone lingers after the others leave. They sit quietly. And then, with a voice like crushed parchment, they ask, "Was that one real?" And you answer, "Which part?" And they say, "The lonely bit." You nod. Because that's always the real part. The rest is decoration. You become the village's unofficial collector of sadness. People tell you their secrets, knowing you'll turn them into something safe. You take their grief, their shame, their longing, and wrap it in metaphor. Add some talking animals. Maybe a dragon. Always a moral that says, you're not alone. Not really. It's not always easy. Some nights, you run out of words. You sit there staring into the fire, your voice cracking, trying to remember why any of this matters. But someone always reaches for your hand. Someone always says, even silence tells a story. Sometimes the story is just, "I'm still here." You realize that storytelling, real storytelling, is less about the tale and more about the people it reaches. You don't have to be profound. You just have to be present and vaguely coherent. You even find yourself telling stories to yourself. When the loneliness creeps back, and it always does, you whisper tales under your breath as you stir porridge or fix your shoes or scrub dried sadness out of your floorboards. You tell yourself a story about a weaver who was so lonely, her tapestries started talking back. Or a farmer who befriended the wind because no one else listened. Or a night watchman who fell in love with the moon. You know they're not real, but they feel real. And in a world where half your neighbors think ghosts are just misunderstood ancestors with bad timing, feelings count for something. Eventually, you teach others to tell stories, too. Children, mostly. You gather them under a leaning tree or beside the hearth and say, "Now you try." Their stories are chaotic nonsense. Half about chickens. Half about clouds. All brilliant. You see yourself in them. The ache. The yearning. The desperate need to make sense of the world through narrative chaos. You encourage them. Because the day you stop telling stories is the day the village remembers that everything is terrifying and dark and possibly haunted. But if someone says, "Let me tell you what happened to me once, in the middle of a thunderstorm," then suddenly the dark feels warmer, closer, bearable. And when people are dying, and they always are, they call for you. Not the priest. Not the healer. You. They want to hear a story one last time. They want their life to make sense, or at least feel like it did. You sit beside them, hold their hand, and tell them about a shepherd who turned into a star. About a baker who danced so hard his sadness cracked and let the light in. About someone just like them, who mattered. You tell them that in stories, no one is forgotten. And that's all they need. So no, you're not a bard, or a scholar, or a poet with a patron and a feathered hat. But you're needed. You make people feel like they belong in a world that's constantly reminding them they don't. And in doing so, your own loneliness becomes something less sharp, less jagged, more shared. Which is kind of what all stories are, really. Loneliness, wrapped in hope, spoken aloud until it sounds like magic. It's festival day. You wake up to the sound of bells, not church bells, no. These are festival bells. Sharper. More chaotic. Probably being rung by someone who's already had 3 pints of ale and forgotten where their shoes are. The village is buzzing. People are scrubbing themselves for the first time in weeks. There's actual soap involved. Someone's even boiled water. That's how you know it's serious. You're not entirely sure what the festival is for. Saints? Seasons? The mayor's birthday? Maybe a particularly charismatic pig? It changes every year. The important thing is, today, you're not expected to work. Well, unless your job is make sure no one burns the bread cart or gets drunk and punches the priest. In which case, congratulations. You're working overtime. But for the rest of you poor, lonely, mudcake souls, this is your big break. Your moment to connect with others in a chaotic soup of food smells, forced merriment, and awkward dancing. And yet, despite the joy and music and scent of roasted onions that fills the air, you still feel a bit hollow. But hey, that's what festivals are for. A socially sanctioned excuse to ignore your inner ache and yell hurrah while throwing turnips at your neighbor in a game that no one really understands. Before we trip over a maypole and into our collective emotional repression, this is your friendly festival town cry reminder to like the video if you're still awake, subscribe if the smell of old ale and roasted melancholy is starting to feel like home, and comment what time it is and where you're listening from. This festival doesn't start until I know there's someone in Iceland listening at 3:44 a.m. while their cat judges them for learning medieval sadness as a lullaby. Back to the festival. The streets are decorated with branches, streamers, and the kind of folk art that says, we had 2 colors of paint and 1 collective brain cell. There are booths, barrels, a mun in a bear costume, who's either part of the entertainment or very, very lost. The children are excited. The old people are watching closely, judging your choice of shoes and your lack of spouse. There's a parade of sorts. Mostly people walking in a line, banging drums, and carrying relics you're pretty sure are just old soup bones painted gold. Someone declares a tournament. Not the glamorous kind with knights and jousting. No, this is the rural kind. Which means sack races, pig chasing, and a dangerously violent game of stick toss, which has already caused 3 injuries and 1 metaphysical crisis. You don't compete. You watch. You eat things you can't afford. You smile at strangers. You keep your hands clasped tightly because you don't quite know what to do with them anymore. There's joy all around you, and somehow, it makes the loneliness louder. Because festivals, for all their noise, have a way of exposing the quiet spaces in your chest. The part that wishes someone would pull you into a dance. Or lock eyes across the food cart and say, You look like you haven't felt warmth in a decade. Let's fix that. Instead, someone hands you a boiled potato on a stick and calls it traditional. There's music, flutes, lutes, drums. A small child with an off-key whistle. A drunk uncle singing ballads about heartbreak and sheep. You sway. You pretend you remember how to dance. You trip over a chicken. No one notices. Or worse, they do notice, and now you're the chicken tripper for the rest of the year. At some point, there's a bonfire. Because it's not a medieval festival until someone lights a massive fire and everyone gathers around it, pretending it's not a deeply symbolic way of warding off the darkness we all carry. You stare into the flames. You see your regrets dancing in the embers. Your old dreams twisting like smoke. The face of someone you once loved flickering just out of reach. And then someone bumps into you and spills honey mead down your sleeve, and the moment is over. You make small talk with acquaintances. The kind who ask things like, still single, or did you finish that shed, or are you the one whose goat drowned last winter? You nod. You laugh. You tell a joke you've used 12 times before because it makes people like you, even though you're pretty sure they only like your performance. Not the actual you. Not the crying alone in a barn you. But tonight isn't about truth. It's about pretending. Pretending that everything is fine. That the world is simple. That connection is easy and joy isn't fragile and nobody here is secretly terrified of dying alone and being eaten by rats. So you raise a mug. You shout along with the others. You clap. You sing a song you only know half the words to. You dance again. Badly. And you start to feel, not happy, but held, loosely. Like maybe loneliness isn't the whole story. Like maybe being part of this wild, muddy, overcooked mess means something. You catch a stranger's eye. They smile. Not the polite kind. The real kind. The kind that says, I see you. You. The one who didn't think you'd make it through the winter. You don't speak. You just nod. And that's enough. You wander off as the fire dies down. The music slows. The stars come out, soft and judging. You sit on a log and stare at the sky and think, maybe this is it. Maybe this is all connection ever is. These little sparks. Fleeting. Flawed. But real. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to keep going. Even if tomorrow, it's back to the grind. The silence. The aching bones and the unshared soup. You'll remember tonight. Not for the games or the food or the goat that tried to join the band. But for that one small moment a glance, a song, a firecrackle, when you didn't feel quite so alone. And that's something. The first frost arrives like a passive-aggressive guest, uninvited, quiet, and somehow judging your entire life. You wake up and your nose is frozen. Not metaphorically. Actually frozen. Your breath fogs in the air, and the walls of your house, which, let's be honest, are more wishful thinking than actual walls, are sweating. Or crying. Hard to say. Welcome to medieval winter. You don't live through it so much as you endure it, like a long sermon delivered by someone with no sense of humor and extremely strong opinions about firewood stacking. And the loneliness? It multiplies. Exponentially. Because winter is the season when everyone retreats into their own homes, their own thoughts, their own small domestic ecosystems of doom and cabbage soup. It's the time of year when being alone with your thoughts stops being poetic and starts being a genuine health hazard. So naturally, you begin talking to your furniture. Before we barricade ourselves inside with the emotional weight of seasonal dread and creaky wooden chairs, take a second, if your frostbitten fingers can manage it, to like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and comment what time it is where you are and how much existential chill you're currently radiating. I guarantee it's warmer than the inside of a 12th century peasant hut. All right, back to your furniture. Your stool becomes stumpy. The bed is Sir Creak-a-Lot. And the broom, which is really just a bundle of twigs held together by hope, is Marjorie, and she's got opinions. You don't decide to name your furniture. It just happens. Somewhere between the third blizzard and your 13th bowl of turnip mush, your brain decides, hey, wouldn't it be nice if the table could listen? And so you talk, out loud, about everything. What you miss, what you regret, what you wish you could forget. You confess to the chair that you once stole a goose egg from the neighbor and blamed it on a fox. You tell the bucket you're not sure anyone's ever really loved you. Not you, the person, just your cooking, your cows, or your silence. The bucket says nothing. You take this as encouragement. The truth is, in winter, humans become strange little creatures. We go inward. We fold. We mumble. We pace. We invent imaginary conversations because the real ones stopped 3 snowfalls ago. Outside, the world is dead. Or sleeping. It depends on how poetic you're feeling. The trees are bare. The sky is gray. The birds are gone, except that one suicidal magpie that keeps looking at you like it knows your secrets. Inside, the hearth crackles. Or it tries to, when there's enough wood. Most days, the fire is more of a suggestion. A single ember, quietly sulking. You huddle beside it like a medieval moth, praying your toes remember what warm feels like. You wrap yourself in every cloth you own. You become a burrito of sadness and wool. And you wait, because that's what winter is. A long, slow wait for the sun to come back and save you from yourself. Some people don't make it. Let's not sugarcoat this. Winter is brutal. Disease thrives. Food runs low. People grow quiet. Sometimes someone you know just stops showing up. Their door stays shut. Their chimney stops smoking. And no one asks questions until spring. It's morbid, yes. But it's also bonding. Because now, when someone does knock on your door, when you hear footsteps crunching through snow and a muffled voice saying, "Are you still alive in there?" It hits differently. It feels sacred. A reminder that you're not entirely forgotten. You invite them in. You share your last heel of bread and your very questionable ale. You tell them what the chair said to you yesterday. They nod like it makes perfect sense. And then they tell you something. Something personal. Quiet. Vulnerable. That's what winter does. It strips away the performance. The festivals, the flirting, the pretending. It leaves you with the raw, unfiltered version of yourself. And if you're lucky, if you're very lucky, someone else shows up to see that version and doesn't run away screaming. Sometimes, your visitors don't even say much. They just sit beside you. 2 bodies wrapped in layers, staring at the fire like it owes you both an explanation. And in that silence, something shifts. The loneliness doesn't disappear. But it's shared. Which, as it turns out, is the medieval equivalent of therapy. You pass the time however you can. You carve things. You repair broken tools. You stare at the ceiling and imagine a better life where you own 2 pairs of socks. You write letters you'll never send. You listen to the wind howling outside and wonder if it's trying to tell you something or just being dramatic. You sleep a lot. Not because you're tired, you're emotionally exhausted. Sure, but mostly because there's nothing else to do, and sleeping is free. Sometimes you dream. Dreams of green fields, loud laughter, and warm hands. Dreams that hurt to wake up from. Dreams that make the cold feel sharper. But still, you get up. You make porridge. You talk to Marjorie the broom. You survive. Because that's the strange, quiet miracle of winter. It teaches you endurance. Not the flashy kind. Not heroism. Just the simple, stubborn act of existing one more day. Eventually, the days grow longer. Barely noticeable at first, a few more minutes of light. A little less breath fog. You stop seeing your reflection in the frozen water bucket, which is an improvement. You catch the scent of something alive on the wind, and your heart aches like it's remembering something it never had. You unbundle yourself. Just a little. A scarf comes off. A glove is lost. You let the fire die early one evening, just to see what it feels like. Spring is coming. And as it does, you realize something you hadn't before. You made it. You survived winter. Again. Not because you were strong. Not because you were hopeful. Not because you had a particularly supportive stool. But because something in you refused to stop showing up. Even when no one was watching. Even when the loneliness whispered things that should never be spoken. You answered it. Every time. With a fire. A bowl of soup. A quiet conversation with the floorboards. And now, here you are. Tired. Frayed. A little more cracked around the edges. But not alone. Because even in the bleakest season, you found moments of connection, even if they were with chairs, brooms, or the occasional human being who also looked at the snow and said, absolutely not. And that's enough.